We are now recording. Hello, everyone. There's a possibility that people will be coming in as usual at a different time, and that is completely fine. But welcome to number 4 of the webinar series. Today, we are going to be talking about working across difference and making better connections. Now, if you have been a stellar student, then you know that this is the 4th webinar. You have fully participated in the other 3, either through the recordings or not in person, but live in real time, I guess is what I'm looking for. This particular workshop, the idea is kind of okay, so now what, right? So we started with a understanding of kind of who and how we are. Then we went to unconscious bias, positive, negative, conscious, and unconscious bias. Then we did a deep dive specific around race and racial identities. And then now the idea is okay, so this is an ongoing issue or a problem or a concern or something that's going to make me nervous. So I'm going to have to figure out how to do something moving forward with every person, every setting, every example. Will you do this 24/7, 100% of the time? No, not at all. But occasionally you will be like, wait a minute, I have a tool set for this. And you can go pull it out of the attic and actually use it and employ it when you need to work across difference. So that is kind of the plan. So let me share my screen. Sharing screen. Great. Let me open back up the chat on the off chance that y'all begin to actually chat with me. Okay, great. So sometimes, excuse me, sometimes these kind of webinars, I'm asked to kind of come in on a landing around being an ally or an advocate or an accomplice, depending on your politics or place in the country as to which word we use. And I don't intentionally land on the word ally, advocate, or accomplice because they mean a lot of different things to a lot of different communities. So what I want to say is when we are working across difference, it doesn't mean that you're going to love it every time. But it does mean that you are going to be in scenarios where you are going to have to work across difference. So what do you do? What skills do you need in those particular moments to be able to kind of get that situation to a better connection? Not necessarily a successful transaction, but a better connection kind of on that human level. Increasing the connection of humanity is what we're going to talk about today. So, again, the texting number that y'all do not use as much as my other audiences. I'm just going to throw it out there. The texting number is 202-670-4262. 202-670-4262. And Kat and I were just talking too. If you want to put your email address into the chat, there is a possibility that I will be coming in person in real life to do more trainings, and so Kat would like to be able to tell you about that. So if you'd like to put your email address or just chat it directly to Kat, that'll be great, and she'll keep track of them. And again, if you have any questions for me forever and ever, you can always text message me. All right, so today, working across difference, making better connections. We're going to use the metaphor of kind of the moon cycles. This is as hippie as I'm going to get, hippie trippy. But the reason why is that these aren't skills that you just arrive at and are done. You're going to have to practice and keep it going over and over and over again because it's a cycle. There are times where you are going to be significantly more comfortable and at ease, and you're not going to have to go to the attic and pull out this process in order to use tools because you're so comfortable. There are other times you know you are very uncomfortable, and so you're like, wait a minute, I have a box in the attic, and then you'll go and use these tools. But I want you to be mindful that there are times where you feel like you are not good at it and you're nailing it. Just like there are times you feel like you're doing it well and you're not. So I invite you maybe to not put the tools up in the attic, but to recognize this ongoing journey and keep them kind of handy. So in order to kind of get through this, we're going to start first with what is the truth. Now, particularly fascinating, as I've been doing this webinar for probably 10 years, currently in our political setting, what means the truth is now a political question. I don't mean this in a political question. I married a philosopher. But what I mean is what is your truth? Where are you starting? What is your vantage point? You may remember from the first webinar, what are you centering, right? So your perspective, your worldview, your truth, as subjective as it may be, that's what I want us to pay attention to. So I just want us to go through a couple of questions and kind of center yourself back into your truth before we start doing the tools. So what I want you to do is I'm going to ask you a series of questions. For example, what is your racial identity? And I want you to either, you can jot it down or just kind of sit with the question, but I want you to answer the question, and then I want you to notice how easy or how challenging was it for you to answer the question? How often do you have to answer this question? Or is this unfamiliar practice? So I want you to answer it and say whether or not you are familiar or not familiar with having to ask this question. And then you're just going to repeat this process eventually. But for now, we're just going to do it once. You don't have to share it in the chat. You don't have to text me. I just want you to sit with it. So first one, and we did this last webinar too, is what is your racial identity? And how familiar are you with having to ask or answer this question? Next is what is your cultural or ethnic identity? And how familiar are you with being asked or having to ask or having to answer this question? It's also kind of a fun extra bonus is how often are you asking other people these questions in order for you to engage? It's irrelevant, but interesting. How familiar are you with this concept? Next is what is your economic or class identity? And how familiar are you with this conversation? Spoiler alert, what is very interesting is that if your current economic situation is different than it was, let's say, as a kid, specifically if as a kid you were raised more lower economic class than you currently are now, often we will answer this from our lowest economic position in our history and not in our reality or current reality. So just notice how you are currently living and how that is in comparison to your childhood, and which one are you more familiar talking about or identifying with or kind of bringing with you. Some people may be in a lower economic class now than they were when they were brought up, so that might be another thing for you just to notice. So what is your economic or class identity, and how familiar are you with the question? Great. So then what is your gender identity, and how familiar are you with that question? With gender, I typically mean feminine, masculine, androgynous. How do you present your gender? Do you identify as a man or a woman, non-binary, a trans person, gender variant or gender queer? What is your gender identity, and how familiar are you with having to answer or ask this question? What's your current ability status? Fun thing about emotional, mental, spiritual, psychological, or physical abilities is that they could be pretty temporary at any point in time. Something could occur. And you may be dealing with things that might be visible or invisible to other people. So what is your current what is your current ability status, and how familiar are you with it? What's your current age? For some of you, this is a number. For some of you, this is like a life status. How familiar are you with having to ask or answer what your age is? How familiar are you with this currently, and has it changed? Did it kind of ebb and flow? What's your religious identity? Religious or spiritual identity or practice, cultural, doesn't matter. What is it? And how familiar are you with answering this question or being asked or asking other people this question? What about your political belief system? Do you have one? Do you not have one? And if you do have one or you don't have one, similar to religious beliefs, how often are you kind of performing this or not performing this, explaining this, identifying this to other people, being asked about it, or asking other people about it? What is something about you that you didn't share with everyone if you were asking these questions out loud. What are things about you that you don't often share? And how familiar are you with the process of not sharing them? Of figuring out how to navigate around certain things that you don't necessarily want to share or you don't want known about yourself? Okay, take a little breather. For some, again, doing this much self-reflection is kind of a new process. But what I want us to do is to focus on our truth, right? Our comfort level with ourselves is a really important truth to start with. So then if we're going to start talking about working across difference, what's different than us if we haven't actually taken responsibility for who we are in the first place? So once we know who we are, now we can talk about working across difference because it's different than us. But we're more centered in who us is. So if we go to differences, it's important to understand that there's all different kinds of differences. There's all different kinds of lived experiences. Even though those lived experiences may be similar, there's still different perspectives, there's different impacts, there's different histories. When we understand that someone very similar to us can be very different and someone very different than us can be very similar, now we're able to combine that together with our truth, right? So we can put that together, and then that's how we get to the knowing how to navigate differences, the knowing how to show up when you're working across differences, and knowing or possibly being able to predict how other people are going to show up with us. We often get very freaked out when we identify difference, but part of that, what's going on, is that we don't actually know what we're bringing to the table to begin with. So once we know what we're bringing to the table, then we can identify what is different. And that different can be less alarming or less defensive making because we know who we are and what we're perceiving as a difference. Now, for knowing, I think it's particularly important to not acknowledge that this is fun with grammar. This little pie piece is what we know we know. So you know what color socks you're wearing. You know when your birthday is. You know your grandmother's favorite cornbread recipe. I don't know. You know what you know. You are consciously full tilt aware of whatever information is that you know. But when we start talking about knowing, you don't know everything, right? And you don't know nothing. So this little pie piece is representing what you are consciously aware that you know. You know it. The next little pie piece is what you are consciously aware you do not know. So for example, what color socks am I wearing? 2 seconds ago, you did not know, but now you know that you do not know what color socks I'm wearing. Are you following me? Now, this is an important activity because you're in charge of this domain. You may know what color socks you are wearing, but you're not necessarily thoughtful about other people and what color socks they might be wearing until some weirdo brings that up, and now you're like, well, now I need to know what color socks you're wearing. I'm not going to tell you, but I will tell you that they're fluffy house socks, and they're stripes, and they have unicorns on them, but I'm not limber enough to show you, so you're just going to have to paint a picture. Okay, so you can know what you know, and you can know what you don't know. But that leaves everything else that you have no idea that you do not even know. So the more you clarify what you do know, and the more you clarify what you know you do not know, the galaxy is ever expanding of the things that you have no consciousness that you do not know. If you can get comfortable with the idea that there are things that you don't even know you don't know, and that the more you become conscious of what you're unconscious of, it just keeps expanding, so it's backfills with more stuff you didn't even know you didn't know. When you can get comfortable with that, you'll tend to be a lot less defensive when you find out that something has occurred or something has a meaning, so you've done something that you didn't know you didn't know. Now you know you don't know, or now you know you do know. But you don't have to get defensive about it because there is an ever-present, ever-ending process of what you don't even know you don't know. So there's no reason necessarily to get defensive about it other than you were unprepared for someone else to know something that you didn't know you didn't know. So in this ever-expanding galaxy of the unknown, just take responsibility for what you do know and what you do know you don't know, and then be prepared for all of the stuff that you didn't even know you didn't know. I promise my socks have unicorns on them. Now, if that is truth, difference, and knowing, that those are the three main categories of like preparing yourself for this conversation, you're the best tool coming in across these conversations, because you don't know what you don't know about the other person. You've written a story about the other person, right? Usually to make yourself feel safe and prepared. But can you know who you are as you're about to engage across difference? Can you do that? If you can pay attention to kind of who you are, then what ends up happening often is, and I should probably back up 1 second, and that when we are paying attention to who we are in a different type of situation, we usually employ something called the golden rule, not the platinum rule. So you may be familiar with the golden rule. It's usually, if I ask you what it is, that you sound like pirates, because it's treat others as you wish them to unto treat you, or something like that. But basically what it means is be nice. Treat people the way you want to be treated, right? So that's what you means. Well, that's great, except not everybody wants to be treated the way I want to be treated. Very few people maybe even want to be treated the way I want to be treated. So I'm preferencing myself again over other people because I don't know. So I'm going to have to engage in some conversation. So Tony Alessandra's research around the platinum rule comes handy here. Instead of just being nice, what the platinum rule is to treat other people the way they want to be treated. Now, how am I supposed to know how other people want to be treated? You're going to have to ask questions, or at minimum, take responsibility that you are treating people the way you want to be treated versus the way they want to be treated. This time of year is always an exceptionally important time to talk about this, because I am deathly allergic to evergreen trees. Super, super, super allergic. So if I were to go to someone's house and they have typically a Christmas tree this time of year, I can't even get inside their house because it eventually will impact my breathing. So what ends up happening is my friends, especially possibly because of COVID, are so excited to see me that I'll ask. I should say, even at the beginning, I forgot to ask because I forgot that this is a thing. So now I'm all super paranoid. Do you have a Christmas tree? Yes, I do. Great. I cannot come inside your house. No. This one's super cute. Yeah, the cuteness is actually not relative to my respiratory system. So I'm sure it's cute. Send me a picture. I'm not coming over. So the first time this happened this season, when I was in Florida, I went to my friend's house, and the youngest kid was still hanging ornaments. And so I was like, I forgot to ask about the tree. So I said, just out of curiosity, is this a real tree or a fake tree? I'm standing as far away from it as possible. And the son said, oh, it's fake. And I was like, oh, okay, great. So then I came, and so then I'm looking at it. It's been a moment since I've seen a Christmas tree. And I brushed by it as I was walking by. And now I have like 300 little blisters all over my skin because I just touched the little needles. Little baby blisters. So then when my friend, the mother, came in, I was like, is that a real tree? What's going on? And they're like, oh yeah, it's real. And I was like, oh, your son said it was fake. And they're like, oh, he meant fur. Yeah, these are very relevant pieces of information. Platinum rule would be, hey, are you okay that I have a Christmas tree? Now, maybe that's from religious practices or family traditional triggers or allergies or something. Platinum rule would be asking what other people want or need, and then you modifying your behaviors accordingly. That's what the platinum rule is treating other people's the way they want to be treated. I usually use an example about pizza toppings on this. So let's say the next time I'm in the Minneapolis area, right? And I'm like, Kat, I made us reservations for lunch. We're going out for pizza. I got an extra large pizza with extra green olives. I can't wait. First off, should I check Kat's calendar? Number two, most people don't like green olives on their pizza. They're wrong, because it's the best topping ever. But I would be using the golden rule by being super excited of bringing Kat to lunch, right? And it's my favorite gateway drug, pizza, and my favorite topping. Oh, this is going to be great. But maybe Kat doesn't like green olives. Maybe Kat had pizza for breakfast and doesn't want it for lunch. And I didn't even check in on the date or the time or the location. Think about traffic, right? You wouldn't do that. So you do use the platinum rule in some settings, and then in other settings we don't. So the key thing when thinking about working across difference is, number one, what is your truth? What do you know about that truth? How does that impact your idea of differences? And then can you employ the platinum rule? If you can employ the platinum rule, you're shifting your perspective. So literally, pun fully intended, we have gone from the earth looking at the moon to the moon looking at the earth. That's what the platinum rule is doing, is you are working across difference because you are willing to shift your perspective as you're engaging in a scenario. Instead of waiting for them to come to you, you are actually paying attention to what these differences are and going to them. When I work with a lot of different organizations, they always are talking about, like, well, we need better sponsorships, or we need to increase membership, or we need to work with our volunteers. We need to be able to make a better connection in the community. So then I'm a consultant, right? So I'll inevitably ask, well, what are you doing? What kind of communications are you doing to tell people that this is what you're trying to do? Well, I sent an email. Anything else? How'd that email work out? Well, you'd be amazed. There's like less than a 6% open rate on that email. Yeah. What's your inbox look like? Like, I don't like little red flags, so I have very few emails in my inbox, but I archive and delete a lot of things. Maybe you're going to need to do something else other than the method that you are comfortable with to actually reach across those differences and engage with people who are not currently being engaged with. If your current level of engagement, email, phone calls, whatever your normal processes, if that's gotten you where you're at and your goal is to do more, then you're going to have to do something different, because what you are currently doing is not currently getting more. Do you see how that works? Doing what you're currently doing more frequently does not necessarily lead to more. What's different? What's something different you could do that you don't even know you don't know about yet? What opportunities exist? How can you use the interests or skills or the differences of the people who are already involved to come up with other ideas that are brand new? Now, usually somebody says, well, this is new. We've never done it before. That's the definition of being new. Nailed it. So maybe you could just keep doing some new stuff and then see what works. If ultimately we're talking about making better connections or elevating our connection to humanity, remember, it's not about being right. It's not about being wrong. It's not about making them lose or making them wrong. It's about increasing community, increasing better connections. So if you have kind of a clean idea of how we've gotten to this point, then there is a flow chart, and I'll share it in the chat right now so I don't forget. But I made this flow chart. It's page 192 in my book. And why won't you click? Here it goes. I know. I'm sorry I clicked on you too many times. My mouse is very upset at me. I'm going to put the flow chart in here. Sorry, my mouse is being slow. Yes, I just blamed my mouse. Okay, open. There it goes. Okay, there it goes. It's in the chat now. So I made this flow chart, page 192. And this is the toolkit, right? This is the thing I'm advising you not put in the attic, but to keep handy. But if you follow along, the first thing you're going to do when you're in one of these instances where you're going to be working across some kind of difference, you're going to decide you're going to make a better connection. And again, in order to do that, you also need to really know, what are you centering yourself in? What's your truth? What do you know? And be prepared for a never-ending, ever-expanding area that you don't even know you don't know, right? Then you can breach and actually start working across difference. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to state, okay, I'm going to make a better connection. I don't recommend this in person with the person you're talking to. I also should say I would recommend practicing these tools with someone you're likely to never see again, so that when you screw up, you can keep track of where you're screwing up, right? So I prefer a drive-through window. Like you're gonna, all right, squawky box approaching. I'm going to make a better connection with this human being. There's a very good chance that that human being isn't even going to be the human being at the window when you pick up your food or whatever. So you're going to practice, and I want you to take note of where it gets hard for you. So the first step is you're going to decide, I'm going to make a better connection. Here goes nothing. Then you're going to decide, how are you going to do this intentional conversation? Phone call, email, text, drive-through window, Wednesday at 4:00, whatever. Like you're going to decide the parameters of what your intentional conversation is going to be, with the goal of increasing the connection to humanity. Notice you haven't said anything yet, because the next step is actually to listen to them as if they are wise. So for example, let's take the squawky box in a drive-through window. I am a delightful, charming, very chatty, humorous person. So in case you didn't notice that, if I'm in a drive-through and the person's like, yeah, what do you want? They're not really telling me that they're in a chatty mood, right? But if they're like, or they're super fun, right? Like they're like, hey, welcome. You want to try something new? I can listen and I can write a story based on what I'm listening to that will then make me or help me adjust how I want to talk or engage with them based on what I've heard first. Now, some people are like, well, duh, that's how what listening is. But a lot of us talk before we listen. It is also true that when we listen, we will make judgments and assumptions about how we should be approaching this person. And that doesn't mean we're 100% accurate. But our lived experience have taught us that when this happens, we should do this. And when this happens, we should do this. So we might not be accurate, but we would feel safe and prepared. But the point is that we're going to modify whatever it is we're about to do because we have listened first. We've decided that this is the instance of an intentional conversation, and we've listened to them first with the goal, say it with me, of better connections, of elevating humanity, right? So once we really listened and we've been able to kind of modify what we're going to do, notice we have not spoken yet. Then, yes, you even have to listen to them. Even them, the ones that you don't want to listen to anymore. You have to listen to them. Then, that is when we are going to slow down even more and intentionally form the message that we are going to try and deliver. By slowing down to form the message, we can intentionally predetermine what the meaning of the message is that we're trying to send. Now, you know that you have not done this when you say something and somebody responds to you and your response to them is, that's not what I meant. Usually, that isn't what you meant. You don't know what you meant, but it wasn't that. Because we haven't slowed down enough to figure out what we meant before we said the thing. When they come back at us and we get all defensive, it might not be what they heard, but we weren't clear in the first place. So I'm going to invite you, email, phone calls, verbal conversations, letters, doesn't matter. I invite you to form a message with such clarity of intention and intended meaning that, here's the part that usually gets people very mad at me. I want you to, before you release it, I want you to be able to be 100% responsible for the intended meaning of that message. Not 50%. Therapists tell you you're only 50% responsible. That's because they need job security. I'm going to say 100% responsible. Whatever it is that you're about to do, you're 100% responsible for it. Again, you don't have to do this 24/7 because we often don't care enough to do it 24/7. But maybe you do it every once in a while, or when it's particularly challenging, or you get like puckery and sweaty about the conversation. Don't say anything until you're 100% responsible for it. Once you've formed the message, you are clear on that intention that is edited, modified because you listened. inside of the parameters that you've set with the goal of connecting humanity on a greater level, better connections to humanity, it is then and only then that you release the Kraken. Once you are 100% responsible, you have formed a message, you are clear on that meaning, and you know what your intention is, not to win or to be right or to make them lose or be wrong, but your intention is an increase of humanity, then you can release the Kraken. And when you release that Kraken, no matter what happens, you can claim or reclaim responsibility for the impact of that message, because you were prepared for it. It might be what you were expecting, it might be totally different, but your preparation doesn't change. So you can claim or reclaim responsibility for the impact, intended or unintended impact, of whatever it is that you just said or delivered or whatever you want to say. Make sense? Anybody sweaty yet? Because the 100% responsible is pretty gross. But if you are 100% responsible for it, then of course you can be 100% responsible for it. See how that works? Then, and only then, after being 100% responsible, can you make meaning from this interaction or this conversation. How did this go? Yes, I'm 100% responsible. I'm not defensive. I'm 100% responsible. How did this go? Was this successful or unsuccessful? Is our relationship better or worse for this? Then you can actually have a conversation with yourself about the meaning of your connection with that person. Did humanity just get better? Did it stay neutral? Did it get worse? By having that conversation, it doesn't mean you're right, but it means you'll feel safe and comfortable with it, and then you can just repeat the process. That's it. That's all you have to do. I know, it's not the easiest lift in the world, but that really is all you have to do, is decide that you want to make a connection with the world. Decide that this is the interaction in which you want to do it. Then you're going to listen to the person you're going to do it with. Form a meaning and a message based on what you've observed. Take 100% responsibility for it, even if you're not right. Release the Kraken. No matter what happens, you're prepared to be 100% responsible for it. And then you can have a conversation with yourself or maybe with them. How'd that go? And how does humanity feel? Bigger, better connected, neutral? Not good. That didn't go good. You get to decide. Then you just repeat it over and over and over again. This is the stuff that we often think we can put in the attic until we need to have a challenging conversation. But the reality is that you need to practice these skills in every conversation. And as you do, depending on the topic or the person, you'll get hung up or stopped on different levels of the flow. You'll get much better here, much worse here, much better here, much worse here, depending on the topic or the person. But you're responsible for that. That's what you have to do, is decide you want to have a better connection with an intentional conversation, listen to them as if they are wise, then take that information that you may or may not even be accurate about and use it to modify and form a message that is clearly around a clearly articulated intention. Then release that, because you're 100% responsible for it. No matter how it lands, you are responsible for that. So then you're way likely to be less defensive. Then you can actually have a conversation that makes meaning from the conversation with yourself and with the other person, and what the impact of the connection was. Sometimes this goes sentence by sentence. Sometimes this goes interaction by interaction. But it doesn't matter if it's in person or email or texting. I think in some ways you can even, I don't know what y'all's therapy experiences are like, but I've had to write letters to people who are no longer living for forgiveness, etc. And it's still just as helpful there too. This is a flow chart about you and your side of the conversation. You are not guaranteed a conversation partner. And honestly, I would recommend not even having a conversation partner who knows you are doing this. I'd recommend you practice with yourself so you can find your own hang-ups by yourself without actually having to be witnessed by other people, because they're likely not going to motivate you to keep trying through those mistakes. So that is how to work across difference and to make better connections. So of course, I want to throw it open to questions and see how y'all are doing out there. You're welcome to text message 202-670-4262 if you have any specific questions or any thoughts or comments across the whole series itself. We'll see if any come in via text or the chat. Don't forget to download your handout from the chat too. And then at the end, which I'm assuming may be in a minute or so, I'll tell you an example of how this works. So some people did text message me, by the way. I do have a book club. It's related to the book. The flowchart's on page 192. If you are interested, you're welcome to talk to me about the book club. It's asynchronous. It's a great professional development. So if you're interested, goodenoughnowbook.com/club. And you can always text message me at 202-670-4262. So if that is end O slideshow, then what I want to do is see if I give you an example of how I used the flowchart. If you can identify which stage we're at, and for those of you playing along, it goes in chronological order. But that way you can also kind of see how I put each of those steps into action, into a conversation. So just wait and see one more second and see if any chats come in or any texts. I'm sure they won't, because y'all are not a very chatty group, but that is fine. So, all right, I will give you my example. But in order to give you this example, I have to warn you that I have a thing for flamingos. It's probably not what you were expecting me to say, but it is relevant, and I didn't want you to get hung up on that detail. It is true. I have a thing for flamingos. So my friend Sylvie and I, who I was actually visiting in Florida at the last webinar, my friend Sylvie and I text message each other pictures of flamingos. She lives in Florida, so sometimes they are real life flamingos, and I travel for a living, so often they are like pencils or napkins or things that I see. So we take a picture of it, we exchange it. I tell this story quite often, so then a lot of participants will also send me flamingos. It makes my day. Please send me flamingos. So every time I get a flamingo from anywhere, or I see one myself, I text message it to Sylvie. This is relevant. One day, I receive a GIF of baby flamingos hatching. Happiest day of my life. So I am a triple Virgo. So the first thing I do is copy the GIF and text message it so that I don't forget and it doesn't get lost in my inbox. So I get a text back from Sylvia, and it says, I think you have the wrong number. I immediately am super defensive, and I'm like, excuse me, Sylvia, what are you doing on my cell phone? And I realize, Sylvia, fat thumbs, I just texted the wrong number. All right, okay. Well, it's also my phone. So who is Sylvia? So then it dawns on me, I didn't know that I still had Sylvia's number in my phone, but Sylvia is my favorite aunt from growing up, who died in a house fire probably about 10 years ago now. So this person obviously has my amazing aunt's recycled phone number. So I decide in the moment, I'm going to make a better connection with said person with Sylvia's recycled cell phone number. I want to do this because I'm so overwhelmed with joy by the flamingo GIF that it just got better remembering my amazing aunt, right? So I want to like extend this forward. It's not about right or wrong. It's just about like, thank you so much, right? Like that's what I decide to do. So how am I going to do this? Well, the person text messaged me back. Obviously, I have their phone number. I'm not going to call them because I'm not a heathen, correct? So I'm just going to text them back. That's the plan. So step 2 is kind of what are the guidelines or guardrails of this conversation? So it's going to be a text. Great. Now, this is a very important PSA for people. There are 2 ways to text message. There is the people who TED Talk in one texting bubble. Do you know these people? If you are one of these people, you are doing this wrong. Because if you put too many ideas in one bubble, I cannot react to each of the ideas and it's a very, 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 very long text message, don't do that. I have decided in my response to this Sylvia now having number person, I'm going to use one text bubble, but it can't be one of those long TED Talker text bubbles. It's just a sentence. That's it. That's all. I'm limiting myself to one text bubble and one sentence. If, by the way, you are one of those really long TED Talker texters, we're annoyed at you. Just so you know. Super annoyed. I will say, though, that every thought gets its own bubble. If your phone is making noise, then that will be annoying to you, but that's your fault for your phone making noise. Turn all that stuff off. It's 21st century. Let's go. All right. So, someone is admitting, as a TED Talk texter, I am more annoyed by 50 in a row. Yeah, see? But I bet, Angela, your phone makes noise. Is that why? Because it goes beep, 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 beep. My dog is terrified of the noises. Possibly. See, I was right. My dog is terrified by all noises that my phone makes. So it is silent. Silent. 911 could be calling me, and it is silent. I just have to notice it. But it is also a light right by my face. Anyway, I have decided one bubble of text, but not a TED Talk texter, Angela. So one sentence is what I've decided. That's step 2, right? So the third step is listen to them as if they're wise. Some smart ass is like, well, how are you listening to a text message? Don't be so literal. I'm looking at their response. It had grammar, right? It had punctuation. It had capitalization. It was not all caps. I am extrapolating a story from their response, which they responded. They didn't even have to respond, right? I'm extrapolating a story that they want to hear from me. Does that mean I'm right? No. But I've decided it's only one text box. How much harm could that possibly do? So I then adjust how I'm going to text message this person based on what I am perceiving in the story I'm writing about their response. Because they know how to use a comma and a caps lock thing and then uncaps lock, obviously they're a rational human being who want to hear from me. Now, I bring that to you because judgments and assumptions are pretty powerful things, and we write stories based on them all the time that we're completely convinced are completely accurate. That is not always true, and in this case, that might not have been the case. But I don't care. I just proceed with my own little stories based on my own lived experiences, with my own judgments, my own assumptions, because I feel safe and prepared. So, we move along to the flowchart. I am now going to write the sentence in the text bubble. I'm going to write in it, form the message where my intention is clear. So basically what I want to tell this person is like, thank you. P.S. You have my aunt's number. Yeah, she died in a house fire. Maybe leave that part out because it's kind of depressing. But she was wonderful and amazing, and you made me happy, and the flamingo gift made me also, thank goodness it was just a flamingo gift, right? Like, so all that stuff is floating around in my head, and I have to figure out how to put this into one sentence. So somehow or another, I end up with a relatively short sentence that just says, I hope you're having a good day. The gift made me happy, but being reminded of my aunt, you have her recycled number, made me even happier, and I just wanted to share that with you. Something like that's what I sent, right? I reread it. I decide I could be 100% responsible for this. If they respond like, stop blowing my phone up or something, like, I am clear on my intentions, I can be 100% responsible. Send. I have released said Kraken. Now, this is not a Hallmark movie, right? Like, the person didn't write me back and we opened some maple syrup farm in a forest. That didn't happen. They did, however, actually respond to the text, which I think is kind of impressive. So, I am 100% responsible for no matter what comes back at me. I claim responsibility. They responded back to my text saying, Sylvia, that's the name of your aunt, I did not say this. Sylvia is evidently an amazing woman because she, in her life, contacted or had such good relationships with so many different people that this actually happens quite often. And I vowed every time I get a text from a number I don't recommend to kind of follow up and see if this is going to be another Sylvia moment. The person calls them Sylvia moments because every once in a while the person says something about happiness or joy or love or something that really was what my aunt was about. And then the person says that when I have a Sylvia moment, I also text message all of the women in my life and I tell them how important they are to me and how much I love them. I know, right? It's still a Hallmark movie, but no maple syrup. I bring that to you because if my goal was to make a better connection, that happened probably 5 years ago. And every time I tell the story, not only is that a good connection, it makes me feel good every time I tell the story, and I tell it to groups of people all the time, and it makes some of y'all feel good. It's still working, right? Like, it's not about right or wrong. It's not about losing or winning. It's about increasing my connection to humanity. And if we can employ that kind of thing, then if we are gifted with a response, then we can find out that how did this work? Is humanity better for this? How is our connection? I don't know anything about the person. I did not maintain a conversation. I am assuming I will wrong fat finger text the person again, and maybe we'll do this all over again. But Sylvia is still in my phone. Sylvie also knows that every single time I tell this story, she's going to get some kind of flamingo situation because it makes me think of her. That's what a better connection is about. And when we talk about working across difference, it is literally slowing down enough to be 100% responsible for whatever it is we're about to do, because we've centered in our own truth, our own knowing and unknowing, and our own differences. So we can be responsible and less defensive to begin with. Now, that's a hoofy kind of hoity-toity, hippie-trippy thing that involved the moon and flamingos. But the truth is that it's just slowing down enough to understand who and how you are with other people before you even engage or disengage with other people. Can you make a better connection? If you can make a better connection with humanity, we're all better for it. That's what working across difference means. Now, before we wrap up today, Kat did ask for people to message her directly the email addresses. There is a possibility that my probation officer is going to let me come in person at some point in time. And if that's the case, we'd like to be able to invite you to whatever next in-person-y stuff looks like. So please make sure Kat has your email address. And you can always text message me, surprise me with a flamingo. You can always text message me at 202-670-4262. I'm happy to help, give any kind of advice I possibly can. But in the last couple of minutes, I thought I'd pass it back over to Kat as we kind of wrap up the 4-part series and see what else we can do together in the future. So thank you, and thank you for working across difference and making better connections. Here you go, Kat.
It's that whole like slowing down and knowing what I'm gonna say. I just want to thank everyone for coming. I think I've said a few times that I don't know most of you, which I think is that much cooler, because it just goes to show that you all really care about humanity, and that's why we're here. We have a group we call Empathy and Equity. It's kind of a safe place to learn about racial inequalities and equity and empathy in the world. If anyone is interested in joining our group, kind of like I said, it's like a safe place for us to just talk about what's going on and doing some learning. Email me. It's kat@sherburneunitedway.org. Yeah, and put your emails in the chat. So if Jess comes back, we're hoping, we're planning. We're not sure when, but then we'll do some more training. But I just really wanted to thank everyone for being here. And that's all I got.
Excellent. I'm putting the book club link in the chat as well. Plus, Try Giving Yourself Away is a really great book that Paula's recommending. Excellent. Very cool. Well, with that, I gift you back 8 minutes of your life back. You're welcome. And I hope everyone's doing well, and I will hopefully see you soon.
Thanks, Jess.